And we're back again with our sprinkler head characters. Last time we met Button, just a little guy ready to start an adventure. This time, the sprinkler head is wearing a fashionable beret and a fun barrette, both made out of acorn parts. As soon as I finished Button and pulled this next picture into my drawing program, I knew that this was going to be Button's slightly older sister. So I went into the design process with that in mind, thinking about the ways in which they would be similar so that they would look related, and the ways in which they would be different so that they would stand out from each other. What I didn't know was how much trouble I was going to have coming up with this design. Once again, this is a speed draw and the lines flicker quite a bit. Just like the last time, I started by outlining the picture so that I could see the shape of things better, but it was less necessary for this one since the acorn bits stand out clearly from everything else on their own. Since I knew that this was going to be Button's sister, the general head and body shapes came easily. I just matched his. The actual pose and outfit unique to her, however, was a bit trickier. Since she was wearing a hat, I decided to put her in outerwear, maybe a bit more prepared and practical than Button. I played around with a bunch of small designs, just like I did last time, and while I figured out the broad idea quickly, I wasn't coming up with any specifics that I really liked. I kept looking over at the first sketch I did and tried to capture the feel of its look, but couldn't quite manage it. So I quickly traced just the pose so that I could see it better to try and figure out what it was about it that I liked. I think it was the sense of confidence, something I was missing while working on this piece. I tried making a more detailed sketch, and a couple more with different poses, one of which I did end up using as one of the extras, but I still couldn't quite replicate the feeling of the first sketch. So I traced the design in order to make it bigger, cleaner, and to be able to work off of it more easily. After one more false start, I finally stumbled into a pose that I was satisfied with. It captured that sense of confidence, while also being a little more dynamic than the original sketch. I added an umbrella, another way in which she comes across as more prepared and practical than Button in his oversized sweater. Her clothes are also big, of course, which, like his, gives the sense of a small character. But since hers is a raincoat, it's clear that, although big, it still fits her properly. I didn't refine the sketch as much as I should have before starting the line art, maybe too confident from how well the additional Button poses went, so I had to figure out many of the specific details as I went. This involved a lot of trial and error, and I wasn't fully satisfied with the look of the umbrella when I moved on. I fell into the exact same trap with the extra poses, but at least I had the main one to work off of for the details this time. Remembering the one walking pose I drew during the sketch phase, I pulled up the sketches to grab it as a base for the second pose, and played around with a few different ways to incorporate the umbrella, deciding to close it, both for something different and out of laziness. After all, a closed umbrella is a lot easier to draw than an opened one. Speaking of the umbrella, while I was working on the third pose and struggling with umbrella angles once again, the first one finally started bothering me enough that I decided to erase it and try again, this time using a reference for that umbrella angle, which is what I should have done in the first place. When drawing a complicated object at an angle, use reference. When drawing just about any object or pose that you're not practiced in, use reference. Basically, when you can, it's a good idea to use a reference. Once all of the poses were finally finished, I started in on the colors. Again, I color-picked from the original picture to do the acorn and went from there. Like with everything else in this drawing, it took a few tries to find something I liked. I decided that since Button was red and blue, this character, which I had started calling Bobbin since it seemed fitting, would be yellow and green. Still those sort of primary, saturated colors associated with childhood. And yes, I know green isn't technically a primary color, but if you're to trust the pack of crayons you get at restaurants, it's right up there. I chose 2 shades of green so that all the different elements could stand out from each other, and then decided to add a little accent color, playing around with blue in the umbrella before settling on a pop of orange in the scarf and leggings. I wanted to keep the palette limited again, but not quite as limited as Button's. And so here we have Bobbin, Button's older sister, slightly more prepared for adventure, or at least she thinks she is. Even a simple design like this can cause you difficulties. But if you keep playing around with the idea, maybe take a break to let it simmer on the back burner for a bit, and use reference, you can usually end up with something you like. Ultimately, I am happy with how she turned out, and I'm even more excited to find out more about this little community and the big world outside of it. I hope you'll come along for the ride.